So our first speaker is a very interesting one. I've been researching him for the past few days, and the most fascinating thing about him is that he's a politician, but he's also got a very good connection to the very first ever lighthouse that was built. It's quite an interesting talk, but I think he's going to come up and tell us a bit more about it. So let's welcome up the DA Shadow Minister of Small Business Development, Mr. Toby Chance.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much, Justin, for that introduction. Yes, I'm only a politician for the last 2.5 years. And it's a very different existence, let me tell you, to being a businessman, which is what I had been for the previous 30 years or thereabouts. And I want to just get one thing straight, first of all. I don't represent the Department of Small Business Development. I represent the Democratic Alliance and am the minister's counterpart. So she and I battle it out in Parliament, and I try and make sure that she lives up to her promises, whether it be developing small business in your part of the world or in Johannesburg or any part of South Africa that she cares to be in. So I recently received this invitation. Unfortunately, my colleague Muzi Maimane, the leader of the party, had another engagement, so he asked me to step in, which I'm very happy to do. Thank you very much to Cape Media for giving me this opportunity. And I'm glad that Justin mentioned my connection to lighthouses, because I was actually going to talk a little bit about them, but was afraid that the topic was a bit obscure. But now I believe he's given me license to possibly elaborate rather more than I would have otherwise done. But before I do that, I think it's absolutely true to say that we live in incredibly exciting times. Challenging times, times where we see possibly more political changes, economic changes around us than we have ever done, certainly in the last 20 years. And obviously the most noteworthy change is the fact that the political landscape around us has undergone you could say a seismic shift. Now that we have 4 metros, which are under control of the DA, we see the opportunity for South Africa to, for the first time in 20 years, understand what a contested political landscape actually is. You know, we've had it pretty much the same since 1994. The ANC just is the government. You know, we just expect that the ANC and government are synonymous, but that is not the case anymore. And I'm not putting my DA hat on at this point. I'm just saying that if one looks at the political landscape, one now has an opportunity to see policies that are fundamentally different being implemented at local level by a party that has been in government in one metro, that is Cape Town, for 10 years, and has always said that it is the party of delivery. So now the party has to deliver. And now wearing my DA hat, we're absolutely conscious of the fact that the people have voted for change, and unless we deliver change that are going to affect people's lives in a positive spirit and a positive manner, practically speaking, then our 5 years will be maybe the last 5 years that we have to affect that change. And I accompanied Herman Mashaba on many of his campaign trails for the last few months. And he made it very clear to voters that he needed a 5-year opportunity. He said, give me 5 years to change your lives. If I don't do it, then kick me out. And that's what democracy is. So it is an opportunity for each of the new mayors, not just of the metros, but also in the other roughly 15 municipalities that the DA has been called into government, to show what it means to be a party for the people. Interestingly, the fact that we are reliant upon coalition partners in some instances, and partners who are not coalition partners in the strict sense of the word, but have given us their vote, by which I mean the EFF, means that we have to govern in ways which are possibly more sensitive to a broader range of interests than we would if we were just governing for the DA. which isn't to say that the DA governs for a narrow set of interests. Far from it. That is never the case, never will be the case. And it's absolutely untrue to say that the DA is a party of privilege, a party of apartheid, and will only bring back apartheid. That is absolute rubbish. But the fact that we are now in coalition with smaller parties means that we have to be even more intent on serving the interests of all the people. And I think that from the point of view of business, that is a very important consideration, because business people ultimately are most affected by what is going on in their immediate environment. It's, you know, the basic services that are expected of any government are what a business requires more than anything else. The Economist magazine recently ran a story on business in Africa, and the tech revolution in Africa has had a major impact, particularly telecommunications. But they said it's all very well to say that you know, telecommunications is transforming Africa, but when, you know, in certain parts of the continent you can't travel from A to B because the roads are so shoddy. You don't have your waste removed. You have inherent corruption. And you have trade barriers that means that it's impossible to do business across borders. You know, the finer things of technology actually mean nothing. So it's interesting to look at what the new governments across the country have prioritized as regards how to make sure that the election promises are going to be now put into place. And it's the three top priorities of each of the new metro mayors to, number one, eliminate corruption. Number two, make sure that services are delivered. And number three, to support small business. Across all the metros, those are the three top priorities. Now, number one, why is eliminating corruption so important? Well, the point about corruption is that it literally is a poison that infests a community, a society, a government, and once it does so, it means that fairness, transparency, and openness are impossible. And as a party of freedom, fairness, and opportunity, the DA believes that that is only possible if one is operating on a level playing field. And a level playing field means that the opportunities for doing business, whether you are an ANC supporter, a DA supporter, black, white, female, male, are all the same. Discrimination is history. So that is why Solium Samanga has started to investigate the dodgy contracts that the city of Shwani went into partnership with various companies to supply electricity meters, various other things, transport agreements. It's why Athol Trollip has declared that the appointment of people through devious and corrupt means is going to be investigated. The same thing as Herman Mashaba, looking at the corruption that occurs within Pick It Up, which is the waste disposal company, are going to be priorities number one. Because once those things are sorted out and government is operating fairly transparently and openly, everybody has an opportunity to succeed. The second thing related to that is the issue of delivering services. And I think that when people come to Cape Town, they are amazed at the extent to which service delivery is just the norm. You know, things work. And, you know, the roads work, the traffic lights work, potholes get filled in, you know, waste gets removed. And it's not just in the suburbs, as some people would say. It's in the townships as well. I can see somebody shaking his head. We can have a discussion about that later. But I can tell you that I spend a lot of my time traveling around the country. And the difference is palpable. There's no question about it. And people say that when they come to Cape Town, that services are delivered. And as Mayor DeLille repeatedly asserts, the city of Cape Town spends 70% of its budget on servicing the poor. And those facts need to be reiterated. And it's going to be the objective of every leadership, DA leadership now installed in government across the country, to replicate that service delivery ethic, to make sure that people get the services they deserve. And then the third thing is small business. Now, South Africa has a strangely concentrated economy. When I say strange, compared to most countries of our relative size and stage of development, we have an overly concentrated economy with more of our GDP accounted for by big and medium-sized businesses than by small businesses. And that has to change. It has to change for a number of reasons, the most important of which is to spread wealth into more people's hands. We have a high Gini coefficient in this country, which means that we have a huge gap between the rich and the poor. We have opportunities to start new businesses which are there, but the barriers to entry are massive. The barriers to entry for small businesses to get onto the supply chains of larger companies are very substantial. And that's not just government's fault, actually. Big business is just as much to blame. And one of the things that the DA, and certainly I have been pushing, is that big business has to be more open, more transparent for its own benefit, not just to support small businesses according to the BE legislation, but it has to be more open to innovation. Because ultimately, a business will only grow because it offers innovation, services to customers better than the competition. So the DA is going to make sure that it does everything it possibly can to lower the cost of doing business where it does govern. So that means reviewing all the bylaws, which we have done in Cape Town, to make sure that they're not just red tape getting in the way of doing business, and that actually they're there to service people. Provide basic infrastructure, and particularly important in the informal economy, where in Johannesburg, for example, the informal sector is regarded as a pest by, certainly by the Metro Police. And it's often the case that businesses are hassled, harassed, their goods are confiscated, they have to pay bribes to get them back, which means that it's very, very difficult to do business. So the first thing that is going to happen in Johannesburg is that we're going to replicate what the city of Cape Town did, which is to review all the legislation to make sure that it is business-friendly. And then also work more cooperatively across the various spheres of government. We obviously have national government, we have provincial government, we have local government, and unless they all work together, we're not going to achieve success. Very interesting statistic that in the last 4 years, the amount of venture capital funding that is coming into the Western Cape has virtually tripled in relation to the amount going to Gauteng. And last year, the Western Cape received roughly 70% of venture capital funding, as opposed to Gauteng's 20%, which reverses the numbers of 4 years ago. Now, that's an indication that the Western Cape, and Cape Town in particular, is open for business. And it is open for business on businesses' terms, not necessarily just on government's terms. So you are very privileged to be living in an environment which is supportive of business, and that is because the DA is a naturally enterprise-friendly party. We believe in the right of everybody to freely transact, freely enterprise, freely go into business, and do it without the harassment of government. And that's a mental shift that I think we're now going to see happening in our other metros where the DA is in government. Because rather than be the party of redistributing a cake which is regarded as being fixed in size, the most important thing that we want to do is to grow that cake. And you are part of that process of growing the cake. I think it's also important for people in business to realize that over many decades, over centuries in fact, businesses have fundamentally changed the world in which we live. I mean, everything that we see around us fundamentally is created by a business. And a business always started with an idea. Started with an idea, and it started with a driving force behind that idea. Now, what's this got to do with lighthouses? And by the way, I have also written a book. This one has actually been published. It was published in 2008, and it's called Lighthouses, The Race to Illuminate the World. And it tells the story of how the lighthouse became a tool of empire. It became a tool of globalization in the 19th century. Now, that's a bit of a stretch, perhaps, but let me try and explain why. It isn't a stretch. In 1819, nearly 200 years ago, a Frenchman called Augustin Fresnel, who was an optical scientist, revolutionized lighthouse technology when he realized that instead of reflecting light through a parabola of copper, which resulted in a large proportion of that light being absorbed by the copper instead of being reflected out to sea, light was more efficiently refracted through glass, through a system of lenses, which resulted in a narrow beam of light being projected out to sea. And this was a revolutionary piece of thinking, dreamt up in a laboratory, which had the effect of enabling much safer maritime trade for the next 100 years, 150 years, until the next technology came about. Because it enabled ships to travel faster without the danger of hitting a rock. Because the beam of light that was sent out from the land got out further, and it was a brighter beam of light. So when I'm driving a ship at 20 knots, it's going to take me less time to get to a rock than it would if I was driving a sail ship at 10 knots. So I'm going to need to have a brighter light shining at me from afar to give me more warning that I have to shift course before I hit that rock. So 1819, this technology was invented, and all around the world, lighthouses used the old technology, which was reflective copper parabolas. At that time, it was the French that were the main manufacturers of high-quality optical glass. But then in 1845, my great-great-grandfather, James Chance, received a letter from one of Britain's most eminent optical scientists to say, has the company that he was a part of, Chance Brothers, who were glassmakers, considered going into the business of making lighthouse lenses? The answer was no, we haven't. But then the correspondence between Sir David Brewster, who was the optical scientist, and my great-great-grandfather, James Chance, got more and more in depth, resulting in 1851, at the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park, in the Crystal Palace, Chance Brothers exhibiting their first ever lighthouse lens, using the technology that had been invented by Augustin Fresnel in 1819. Now, they were the first of a number of British companies that had attempted this feat of turning a piece of glass into a reflective and a refractive piece of technology. And it involved having to change their concept of what their business was. They had to say to themselves, we're not in the glass business per se, we're in the communications technology business. That requires a change of mindset. And it just shows that today, when we're going through massive technological change, it's not like we've not been there before. Every business that has gone through a phase of technological change has to ask the same questions that my great-great-grandfather had to ask himself and ask his colleagues. What business are we in? And after that 1851 exhibition, Chance Brothers became the largest supplier of lighthouse lenses in the world, with over 2,500 lenses being supplied over the next 100 years. Just down the road here, Greenpoint, across the Cape Town, across the bay, Robben Island. Most of the lighthouses around South Africa have been supplied with technology that came out of the Birmingham factory. So I know what it's like, in a sense that entrepreneurship and technological change, runs through my veins, and now it's very interesting to see how the revolution that transformed maritime technology is now transforming personal transport. And the most obvious way in which it's doing that is through the use of mobile technology. And I see that on the program later on, somebody from Samsung is going to be talking about the impact of mobile, how to mobilize your business, literally. Well, look at Uber. Uber has a very radical vision. It wants to eliminate personal car ownership. Now, the internal combustion engine, which itself was a revolution in the 1880s when it was invented, created mass transport for the individuals. It enabled people to literally drive wherever they want at an affordable cost. But now the technology, the combination of the technology of GPS and mobile smartphones has totally transformed and revolutionized and disrupted what we understand to be the nature of personal transport. It's going to be cheaper within the next year or two to take a ride on an Uber or some other ride-hailing service than it is to be owning a car. So now what we have is Uber actually is not in competition with other app makers alone. It's in competition with Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, all the other car manufacturers. And they're all rushing to develop equivalent systems and technologies. Google and Apple are now also looking at revolutionizing transport by creating self-drive cars. So a combination of self-drive cars on the one hand and cars that don't sit in your garage but are roaming around waiting for you to call them on your Uber app is what is transforming public transport. And the same is pretty much the case across every single industry. I heard on the radio this morning coming into work that a UCT graduate has won a prize for the best banking app. Banking is being revolutionized. I mean, for those of you who haven't looked into it, look at what is happening with Bitcoin and blockchain, which is digital money. We don't really fully understand yet how that's going to change the nature of money, but it fundamentally will change the nature of money. And if you in your own business are not aware of the huge changes that are coming over the horizon, then your business may not have a right to exist within the next couple of years. So my advice to you as I close is ask yourself the question, does my company, does my business have a fundamental right to exist? That question I first heard being asked by Alon Reyes, who is the founder of Reyes Corp and one of the most visionary business leaders in this sector of business support and incubation. Because so many businesses come to him looking for mentorship, looking for incubation, excuse me, and he asks them the same question, does your business have a fundamental right to exist? What is it offering that gives customers the confidence to spend money buying the product or service? And I think that that is a fundamental question that you should be asking yourself every day that you wake up on this earth. And the answer must be yes, and this is how it has a right to exist. So I hope that the deliberations today will give you lots of practical tips, lots of information. I'm sure they will, judging from the program. But I also hope that it'll give you inspiration to realize that being in business is not such a mundane thing. Being in business allows you to change the world. It fundamentally does. Whether you stay as a small business or have ambitions to grow as a big business, remember that business has the power to change the world for the good. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, then you will be making a contribution to not just the growth of your business, the growth of your family's opportunities, but also to the growth of the wider economy of Cape Town and, of course, South Africa. That's a message that I think is worth taking away today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Toby. Are there any questions for Toby before he leaves? No? A member of the DA on stage? One question? Yes.
Honorable member, can you elaborate more on the venture capital 70% issue? That's all.
Did everybody hear that question?
Question was, can I elaborate on the venture capital situation? Well, let's just first of all define our terms. Venture capital is capital that is invested into businesses at a very early stage in their development. And it's including businesses that have literally not started yet, businesses at the ideation phase, but also businesses that are maybe 1 to 2 years old and need to have an injection of cash. Now, because Cape Town has an unusually large number of angel investors compared to other parts of the country, that money is being channeled through those angel investors into small businesses. Now, an angel investor is an individual who takes a portion of his or her personal wealth and invests it as an equity partner in somebody else's business. And we're developing an ecosystem, if I may call it that, of investors, angel investors, and also institutional investors that is making it more attractive to put money into risky businesses. And let's face it, venture capital is a risky place to invest. Typically, if a venture capitalist were to have a portfolio of 10 investments, he would hope that 1 or 2 of those would fly, 2 or 3 may just sort of bumble along, and 6 or 7 will die. You know, that's just the way things work. So what has happened in the last year or so, or 3 or 4 years, in fact, is that the trend towards venture capital coming to the Cape has accelerated, which means that it's overtaken Gauteng. It's not to say that Gauteng in absolute terms has gone down, but in relative terms it has. Does that answer your question?
Part of it. Part of my question you are covering. However, you see, the question then is that how do we as small businesses benefit from what you are talking about? Are we talking, say for instance, we are talking about small businesses within the tourism sector or agriculture, etc., etc. Have you then, packaged this angel or venture capital program to say, no, we do have 10 of them speaking this language, etc., etc.
Well, I mean, I can't say that the DA has in the Western Cape. So, for example, the DA government at the Western Cape level, through Alan Windy, the MEC, runs the Western Cape Funding Fair, which operates from this building. Every year there is a funding fair where funders, in other words, investors, have an opportunity to engage and meet with prospective investments, business owners. And that's become a feature on the annual landscape. I think that the City of Cape Town has an investment desk through the Mayor's office, and the Premier of the Western Cape has the annual Premier's Entrepreneurship Awards, so there is a definite focus on entrepreneurship. I think that it's fair to say that the government isn't always as responsive as it should be, but I do know that if you were to approach the Western Cape government, either through the Premier's office or the MEC's office, you will get a response, and they can channel you into the various directions that is appropriate for your business.
Thanks very much, Toby. I think we'll take one more question here. Yeah.
I think that you've answered just briefly answered one of my questions, is how do you access the support from government? And secondly, the kind of support that you're getting from SARS, which is a department in the Western Cape. I've been struggling for a year just to get my company registered with SARS. Now I've got a tax clearance certificate, but to get the registration completed, it's such a slip. You're being sent from pillar to post. Now, formerly they were an organization or company that if you had registered your company, that you would get all the support you need to actually stream flow your company, where you know where you pay your taxes and where you pay your UIF and so on. But it's been so difficult to do that. Now, my question is, how do you access the support if you are, like many people here, are starting off a business? Where do you actually go, where someone actually sits with you and take you through the whole process, and there you go? But I'm telling you, for a year now, I've been struggling. I've been to SARS 4 times, but they just send you away. It's difficult.
Look, I can't answer for SARS, but I do know that SARS is making an effort through the establishment of small business desks in its offices to address the very issue that you've been complaining about. I can't say that it's necessarily, had the impact that it has. Obviously, in your case, it hasn't. But certainly at a government level within the Western Cape and within the city of Cape Town, more effort is being made than ever before to streamline processes to make it easier for people to register the businesses and also to deal with all the tax issues that are relevant to a small business. Also, the banks are starting to come to the party. So you can now register a company through a bank. If you set up a business account through FNB or Nedbank, you can do it online. The CPIC, which is the successor to Cipro, which is where you register your company, can also be done online. There is also the Western Cape Red Tape Reduction Unit, which has been very successful in helping people deal with the problems that you've just referred to. So I suggest anybody that hasn't done so, get hold of the Red Tape Reduction Unit. Just Google it. It's within the Department of Economic Opportunities. And I know that they have a team of people who are there dedicated to solving problems and making your lives easier.
Thanks, Toby. So there is a member from SARS that's going to be here a little later.
Now, for this year that I've been operating, it's so difficult to access the tender process at the City of Cape Town. Right? I'm not going to speak about what I'm doing now, but what I do know is that there's one company that did just about all the work from the City of Cape Town. Now, we are small businesses who are starting to develop our businesses. I've started with 1 car a year ago. I've got 4 cars on the road now. But to access the work, it's been a nightmare. You just cannot access it because this one big company is getting all the work. And we cannot access it as small businesses because of whatever's happening in the City of Cape Town. I must tell you, it's really...
All right. Well, I'm perfectly happy to investigate that for you, if you want to give me your details afterwards. The City of Cape Town has a policy of advertising and putting out SMSs to businesses on their supply database of every tender more than 2,000 Rand is advertised by the City of Cape Town. And if it seems that there is unfair allocation of business to one or other company, then that is wrong, unless there are good reasons for it, which I can't say exist or don't exist. But if you want to give me your details, I'll happily investigate it for you. Right, I don't want to take up too much of this time.
Thanks, Toby. Thanks very much.